there is belief, and then there is skepticism. Between the two lies a vast territory of questions and the unknown. What if reality is far more complex than we have been willing to perceive? What if the stories we dismissed as myth and legend hold the keys to understanding consciousness? From ghostly encounters to inexplicable lights in the sky, humanity has always sensed there was something more out there. Some call it paranormal, and others call it the divine. Some look to the stars for answers while others search within. And yet, philosophy asks, why? Theology asks, who? Science asks, how? And we ask ourselves, what if? We stand at the meeting point, a place where the veil between realities is thinner than you might think. This is the crossroads of the veil. The prevalent narrative depicts UFOs as alien spacecraft piloted by beings from other planets, a story aligning with our technological age and science fiction expectations. However, what if this extraterrestrial explanation is a misdirection? Not necessarily government deception, but a fundamental misunderstanding? What if UFOs and their occupants have always been here, hidden within our world or in interwoven dimensions, adapting their appearance to human expectations? Perhaps the phenomenon isn't about interstellar travel, but something interacting with our minds and perceptions. Instead of looking to the stars, we should explore history, folklore, and myth, realms often dismissed, but potentially holding keys to a more bizarre truth. This exploration, following a scientist who questioned the easy answers, opens a passport not to another planet, but to Magonia. Part 1. The Unsettling Question. The journey we're embarking on tonight leads into territory that feels both deeply familiar, echoing in our oldest stories, and profoundly alien, challenging our modern assumptions about the world. We're exploring a book, a single seminal text published back in 1969 that ripped apart the comfortable narrative of extraterrestrial visitation and continues to cast a long, unsettling shadow over the study of the unexplained, over ufology, folklore, and even the philosophy of consciousness. The book is Passport to Magonia, From Folklore to Flying Saucers, and its author, the enigmatic Dr. Jacques Vallee, is the man who dared to suggest that the aliens might be fairies, demons, angels, jinn, or something else entirely, something protean, elusive, something that plays games with our reality, a cosmic trickster hiding behind 1,000 masks, perhaps for purposes we cannot even begin to fathom. This isn't just about swapping one label for another. Replacing extraterrestrials with fairies is a gross oversimplification that misses the revolutionary depth of Vallee's inquiry. This is about questioning the very nature of the phenomenon itself. Is it purely physical? Is it psychological? Is it something that straddles both, or exists beyond that dichotomy? It's about examining its perplexing relationship with human consciousness, its stubborn persistence throughout history, and the chilling possibility, explored by Vallee with unnerving calm, that we are interacting with something that actively manipulates our beliefs, something that might even be using these encounters as a form of subtle, long-term control over human culture and evolution. Forget little green men arriving in tangible spacecraft with messages of peace or warnings of destruction. Think, instead of trickster gods from ancient pantheons, think of interdimensional entities bleeding through the thin spots in reality. Think of a force that weaves itself into our myths and nightmares, adapting its appearance to fit our deepest fears and desires, guiding our collective story from the shadows. Vallee didn't offer easy answers or comforting resolutions. He offered a darker, more complex, and frankly, more terrifying map of the unknown. A map where the borders between our world and somewhere else are terrifyingly thin, perhaps even illusionary. A map that suggests the real mystery isn't just out there in the sky, but deep within ourselves and deep within the hidden, unexplored folds of reality itself. Are you ready to question everything you thought you knew about flying saucers? Part 2. The Investigator and the Anomaly. To truly grasp the impact, the sheer intellectual audacity of Passport to Magonia, you first need to understand the man behind it and the strange, supercharged world of UFO investigation he stepped into in the 1960s. Jacques Vallee wasn't your typical UFO enthusiast, chasing lights in the sky with blurry photographs and fervent belief. Born in Pontoise, France, in 1939, he was trained rigorously as an astronomer, mathematician, and computer scientist. He earned a B.S. in mathematics from the Sorbonne, an M.S. in astrophysics from the University of Lille, Nord de France. He wasn't some fringe figure operating outside the system. He moved within the scientific establishment. He worked on early artificial intelligence research, was part of the team at Stanford Research Institute, SRI, and the Institute for the Future that helped build ARPANET, the very precursor to the Internet we use today. He consulted for NASA, mapping Mars with the Mariner probes. Later in his career, his expertise would lead him to venture capital, co-founding a successful firm in Silicon Valley, and even advising programs like Bigelow Aerospace's Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Study, and, indirectly, the Pentagon's shadowy UFO Investigation Unit, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. He possessed credentials, a scientific pedigree that lent immediate weight and seriousness to his investigations into a subject often ridiculed and dismissed. He was, famously, the direct inspiration for the thoughtful, open-minded French scientist Claude Lacombe, played with quiet intensity by legendary director François Truffaut, in Steven Spielberg's iconic 1977 film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Spielberg, who consulted with Vallee during the film's development, captured something essential about the man: the blend of rigorous scientific thinking and a courageous willingness to confront the truly strange, the deeply anomalous, without resorting to easy explanations or premature conclusions. Vallee's interest wasn't purely one of detached academic curiosity either. It was sparked, in part, by personal experience. He reported his own compelling sighting as a young man in Pontoise, France, in May 1955, an event that planted a seed of enduring curiosity about the nature of unidentified aerial phenomena. More disturbingly, and perhaps more formative, was an incident he claimed occurred while working on the staff of the French Space Committee in Paris in 1961. He alleged that he and his colleagues witnessed tracking tapes showing an unknown object orbiting Earth. This object was moving retrograde against the Earth's rotation, something impossible with known rocket technology at the time. The team was initially excited, speculating that perhaps Earth's gravity had captured a small natural asteroid into an unusual orbit. But then, according to Vallee's account, an unnamed superior came into the room, confiscated the tapes, and deliberately erased them right before their eyes. This experience, this hint of official suppression, this glimpse of something technologically inexplicable being actively hidden, perhaps solidified his resolve to look beyond conventional explanations, to question the official narratives surrounding unusual aerial sightings. Cert. He entered the burgeoning field of UFO investigation in the mid-1960s. This was a time when the phenomenon, born in the nervous atomic dawn of the post, World War II era with Kenneth Arnold's 1947 sighting of 9 crescent-shaped objects skipping like saucers near Mount Rainier, and fueled by the enduring enigma of the alleged crash near Roswell, New Mexico, was largely interpreted through one dominant, seemingly straightforward lens: the extraterrestrial hypothesis. The idea was simple, if staggering in its implications. UFOs were physical spacecraft, nuts and bolts machines, constructed and piloted by intelligent beings originating from planets outside our solar system. Visitors from the stars, exploring our world for reasons unknown. Vallee's early books, like Anatomy of a Phenomenon, 1965, and Challenge to Science, The UFO Enigma, 1966, co-authored with his then-wife, Janine, approached the subject with this scientific mindset. He meticulously cataloged sightings, applied statistical analysis, searched for patterns in appearance, location, and timing, and argued passionately for the scientific legitimacy of studying these anomalies. These early works often operated within a framework sympathetic to, or at least seriously considering, the extraterrestrial hypothesis as the most plausible explanation for the core phenomenon. He was trying to bring order to the chaos of anecdotal reports, to apply the rigorous tools of science to a mystery drowning in speculation and government obfuscation, like the often dismissive findings of the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book. But the deeper he dug into the accumulating case files, the more the raw data troubled him. The sheer volume of reported close encounters, landings, and interactions with occupants, thousands upon thousands worldwide, seemed excessive, almost profligate, for a simple, clandestine scientific survey of Earth by cautious extraterrestrial explorers. Why so many landings in populated areas? Why interact in such bizarre, often frightening, sometimes seemingly pointless ways? The nature of the encounters themselves was often deeply strange, illogical, almost theatrical. Reports were filled with elements that seemed nonsensical or symbolic rather than practical or technological. Witnesses described craft that changed shape, merged, or vanished instantly. They reported occupants who performed absurd actions, delivered cryptic or contradictory messages, or seemed more interested in psychological manipulation than scientific data collection. The reported occupants themselves posed problems for the simple extraterrestrial hypothesis. Often humanoid, yes, but their specific forms, the later archetype of the large-headed, gray-skinned alien being just one of many reported types, seemed biologically improbable to have evolved identically on entirely different worlds. Furthermore, their described physiology often seemed ill-suited for the rigors of interstellar travel or even Earth's environment. Their behavior, too, frequently defied the logic one might expect from members of an advanced scientific civilization engaged in exploration. They seemed inconsistent, sometimes benevolent, sometimes malevolent, often simply baffling. And crucially, Vallee, with his broad knowledge of history and science, began noticing echoes, persistent whispers from the past. Stories from folklore, from mythology, from religious texts, accounts of aerial phenomena, and strange beings that sounded disturbingly familiar, mirroring the modern reports in uncanny detail. Accounts of aerial ships, strange beings descending from the sky, abductions by non-human entities, periods of missing time, encounters with beings who were powerful, capricious, definitely not human, but also not necessarily fitting the neat box of extraterrestrial visitor. This growing cognitive dissonance, this sense that the extraterrestrial hypothesis was too simplistic, too narrow, too culturally bound to our 20th century mindset, led to his great intellectual turn. a paradigm shift culminating in the publication of Passport to Magonia in 1969. The title itself is a deliberate provocation, a direct invocation of legend, signaling his radical shift in perspective. Magonia, as mentioned, was that mythical realm in the clouds described by Agobard, the 9th century Archbishop of Lyon. Peasants in his diocese claimed ships sailed from this aerial kingdom. Their crews, the Sylphes, or Tempestari, the storm makers, accused of blighting crops with magically induced storms, sometimes in league with earthly sorcerers. Agobard, a rationalist for his time, tried to debunk these beliefs as superstition, but the legend persisted, a folk memory of aerial beings interacting with Earth. For Vallee, Magonia became a potent symbol for all such legendary otherworlds described across cultures: the Celtic elfland or fairyland, the mythical Hyperborea, the realms of angels and demons described in religious cosmologies, heaven and hell themselves, places typically beyond human reach in ordinary states of consciousness, yet from which emissaries periodically emerge to interact with our world, often in disruptive, enigmatic, and reality-bending ways. Vallee's radical proposition, the explosive core of Passport to Magonia, was this: what if the UFO phenomenon wasn't primarily about new technology arriving from distant stars, but represented the contemporary manifestation of the same ancient persistent pattern of interaction between humanity and some form of non-human intelligence or phenomenon? What if the beings from Magonia, or Elfland, or the biblical heavens, or wherever, never actually left? What if they just updated their wardrobe, their technology, their performance to match the expectations of the current era? What if they traded gossamer wings and pointed caps for silver suits and bubble helmets, swapping enchanted chariots and fiery wheels for sleek, silent flying saucers? What if the phenomenon adapts itself, chameleon-like, to the prevailing beliefs and expectations of the culture it manifests within? What if we aren't dealing with space brothers arriving for the first time, but with something far more ancient, far more deeply embedded in the human experience, something that has always walked the liminal spaces between our perceived reality and another? The implications were, and remain, staggering. Part 3. Echoes through time. Vallee didn't just float this audacious, paradigm-shattering idea. He meticulously constructed a case, brick by painstaking brick, drawing parallels so striking, so numerous, so specific across vast stretches of time and culture, that they had become profoundly difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence or wishful thinking. His methodology in Passport to Magonia was itself a radical departure from the prevailing nuts and bolts ufology of the time, which primarily focused on analyzing physical evidence, radar returns, landing traces, alleged debris, propulsion systems, trying to fit the phenomenon into a conventional scientific, typically extraterrestrial, framework. Vallee, instead, became an archaeologist of the anomalous, a folklorist of the impossible. He dug deep into the stratified layers of human history, folklore, religious texts, mythology, and ethnographic accounts from around the world. He then systematically compared these ancient and medieval narratives side by side with the modern UFO reports he had meticulously catalogued. The book's famous appendix, A Century of UFO Landings, 1868 to 1968, is itself a monumental piece of research, listing nearly 1,000 specific cases with dates, locations, witness descriptions, and reported effects, demonstrating his unwavering commitment to documenting the raw data, the eyewitness accounts that form the bedrock of the mystery. But the true genius of the book lay in the synthesis, the pattern recognition, the identification of recurring themes and motifs across these seemingly disparate domains. His first major line of attack was establishing historical continuity. The extraterrestrial hypothesis, by its very nature, implicitly assumes that UFOs are a relatively recent phenomenon, emerging primarily after World War II, perhaps spurred by humanity's own entry into the atomic and space ages. Vallee systematically demolished this assumption, arguing with a wealth of evidence that beliefs and reported encounters strikingly similar to modern UFO phenomena have recurred throughout recorded history and across diverse cultures. He wasn't just talking about vague lights in the sky that could have been comets or meteors. He was finding specific, detailed accounts of structured objects and encounters with non-human entities possessing extraordinary abilities. He pointed to ancient records, often dismissed or misinterpreted by mainstream historians. Mayan carvings, like the aforementioned sarcophagus lid of King Pakal the Great of Palenque, discovered in 1952, depicting a figure seated within a complex apparatus featuring levers, pedals, and what looks like exhaust flames, interpreted by ancient astronaut theorists as a clear depiction of space travel, but even viewed more conservatively, undeniably strange within its supposed cultural context. He cited ancient Japanese chronicles, like the account from October 27, 1180 A.D., describing an unusual luminous object seen flying from a mountain in Ki Province, described specifically as an earthenware vessel, which changed course and disappeared over the horizon, leaving a luminous trail, a description remarkably evocative of modern UFO reports. He highlighted the enigmatic Dogu statues from Japan's prehistoric Jomon period, dating back thousands of years, small hollow clay figurines depicting humanoid figures clad in bulky, elaborate suits, with large, goggle-like eyes and helmets featuring filter-like apparatus, bearing an uncanny resemblance to modern pressure suits or astronaut gear, and utterly distinct from other Jomon art depicting humans or animals. Why create these specific, strange figures? He drew compelling parallels with biblical accounts, not just vague mentions of angels, but specific descriptions like Ezekiel's vision of complex, mobile wheels within wheels, accompanied by winged beings, or Elijah's dramatic ascent to heaven in a fiery chariot, or the pillars of fire and cloud that guided the Israelites through the desert, described as tangible phenomena providing light and direction. He noted the descriptions of celestial beings organized in hierarchical, almost military fashion, wielding powerful weapons of indignation, descending from the sky in luminous craft. He plunged into medieval European chronicles, unearthing tales like those from 9th century Lyon about aerial ships emerging from the clouds of Magonia, their crews interacting with humans, sometimes hostilely. He recounted the bizarre, detailed incident reported by Gervase of Tilbury and others from 1211 A.D. in Cloera, Ireland, where the anchor of an aerial ship supposedly snagged on a church archway during Mass. A rope ladder descended and a crewman climbed down, moving strangely as if underwater. When the villagers rushed to seize him, the bishop intervened, warning it would kill the man, as he was effectively drowning in the dense atmosphere of Earth. The crewman hastily reascended. The crew cut the anchor rope, the heavy, unusual anchor reportedly kept as a relic in the church for years, and the ship sailed away into the clouds. Fact or fable? Vallee argued the pattern of interaction with beings from an aerial realm, possessing strange technology and different environmental needs, was the crucial point. He highlighted the well-documented waves of mystery airship sightings across America and Europe in the late 19th century, especially 1896 to 97. Numerous reports from credible witnesses describing large, cigar-shaped or winged craft equipped with powerful searchlights, propellers, and sometimes visible occupants, seen decades before the Wright brothers achieved sustained flight, or Count von Zeppelin perfected his rigid airships. These weren't just misidentified stars, they were detailed accounts of seemingly manufactured aerial machines behaving in inexplicable ways. He even controversially connected the core phenomenon to major religious apparitions, suggesting events like the visions at Fatima, Portugal in 1917, with its dancing sun witnessed by tens of thousands, associated atmospheric phenomena like angel hair falling from the sky, strange heat effects, and prophetic messages delivered by beings of light, shared fundamental structural similarities with modern UFO close encounters, including profound physiological and psychological effects on witnesses and a sense of reality-altering significance. The message, hammered home through this relentless accumulation of historical cases, was undeniable. Something strange has been interacting with humanity, appearing in our skies and on our land for millennia. The phenomenon wasn't new, only our interpretation, our cultural lens, had changed. But Vallee went deeper than just noting historical presence. His second, and perhaps more compelling, line of argument focused on the phenomenological parallels, the eerie, specific, often peculiar similarities in the details of the encounters themselves, details that bridge centuries and cultures, connecting the medieval fairy abduction to the modern alien abduction, the encounter with a jinn in the desert to a close encounter on a lonely highway. Consider the entities described across these disparate accounts. Modern UFO reports frequently feature small humanoid figures, the Greys being a prominent later archetype. But Vallee documented a much wider variety in the pre-1969 cases, including robotic figures, giants, and monstrous beings, often with disproportionately large heads or eyes, sometimes described as lacking mouths or noses, and typically clad in seamless, one-piece suits, often metallic, silvery, or luminous. Vallee meticulously juxtaposed these descriptions with those found in folklore from around the world. The elves, dwarves, gnomes, and goblins of European tradition, the Lutins of France, the Irish good people or gentry, also known as the Sidhe, the Scandinavian huldrefolk, the jinn of Middle Eastern lore, beings often described as small, though sometimes large or shape-shifting, possessing unusual physical features, known for their strange attire, sometimes shining or metallic, their hidden realms, underground in mounds, in forests, or in the air, and their often capricious, unpredictable, and morally ambiguous interactions with humans. He noted how both modern aliens and these folkloric beings frequently displayed an unsettling, often intrusive interest in human affairs, particularly reproduction. Tales of changelings, sickly fairy babies swapped for healthy human infants, of humans abducted to fairyland for what seems like days, but turns out to be years, or vice versa, of sexual encounters between mortals and supernatural beings, succubi, incubi, fairy lovers, swan maidens, sometimes resulting in hybrid offspring. How different were these, structurally and thematically, Vallee asked, from modern abduction narratives involving invasive medical procedures, often focused on reproductive organs, the collection of sperm and ova, periods of missing time, and disturbing, persistent stories of human-alien hybridization programs? Consider the witness experiences themselves. People encountering UFOs and their occupants, just like people encountering fairies or other supernatural entities in folklore, report a remarkably consistent cluster of effects. Temporary paralysis, feeling frozen or unable to move, often accompanied by a humming sound. Strange physiological reactions like burns, rashes, conjunctivitis, nausea, dehydration, or later health problems like radiation-like sickness, profound disorientation, confusion, a dreamlike or altered state of consciousness during the event, and that deeply unsettling signature phenomenon, missing time, where minutes, hours, or even days vanish from conscious memory, a hallmark of both modern UFO abductions and classic tales of being spirited away by the fairies to their timeless realm. Communication, too, showed uncanny parallels across eras, often reported as telepathic rather than verbal. Even when verbal communication occurs, it's frequently described as strangely accented, grammatically incorrect, or using archaic language. The content of the messages is frequently cryptic, paradoxical, nonsensical, trivial, or focused on broad themes like ecological warnings, spiritual transformation, or impending doom, mirroring the enigmatic pronouncements, riddles, prophecies, and sometimes misleading advice given by fairies, spirits, or angels in older traditions. Even specific, peculiar, seemingly arbitrary details matched up across the centuries, details hard to explain away as simple coincidence. The offering or avoidance of certain foods, for instance. In many fairy tales, accepting food or drink offered by the fairies traps the human in their realm forever, or alters their perception permanently. Fairies themselves were often said to avoid salt, a substance associated with preservation and purification in human culture. Vallee highlighted modern UFO cases with similar strange resonances, like the famous 1961 incident in Eagle River, Wisconsin, where farmer Joe Simonton reported encountering small, dark-skinned beings who emerged from a landed metallic saucer. Through gestures, they asked for water, which Simonton provided. In return, they gave him 4 small, hot, porous pancakes, apparently cooked on board. Simonton, curious, ate one, noting it tasted like cardboard, and, significantly, was saltless. A bizarre, almost comical detail, easily dismissed, unless placed alongside centuries of folklore about ritual food exchange, the dangers of otherworldly sustenance, and the specific aversion to salt in encounters with the supernatural. Another example, the recurring motif of beings wearing helmets or head coverings, from the Dogu statues to medieval accounts of armored figures to modern reports of aliens in space helmets, or the association of encounters with specific geographical locations, often liminal places like crossroads, forests, mountains, or bodies of water, places also traditionally associated with entrances to the fairy realm or encounters with spirits. This relentless cataloging of parallels, entity descriptions, abduction patterns, physiological and psychological effects, missing time, communication styles, symbolic actions, geographical correlations, even peculiar details like food rituals or clothing, builds a powerful, cumulative case. It suggests that something deeper and more consistent than random misidentification, collective delusion, or modern science fiction influence is at play. It points towards an underlying phenomenon expressing itself through remarkably stable patterns, a persistent archetype manifesting in culturally specific guises. But Vallee added a third, even more disturbing and intellectually challenging, layer to his analysis, the pervasive theme of absurdity and deception. He didn't shy away from the high strangeness, the elements in UFO reports that seem utterly illogical, physically impossible according to known laws, counterintuitive, contradictory, or just plain silly. The aliens who offer tasteless pancakes, the craft that perform impossible right-angle turns at hypersonic speeds, vanish instantly, or seem to merge and separate. The encounters that seem designed primarily to confuse, terrify, or mislead the witness, rather than to communicate clearly, gather scientific data, or achieve any obvious practical goal. The messages delivered that are often contradictory, nonsensical, trivial, or demonstrably false. Instead of dismissing these bizarre elements as mere noise in the data, as evidence of witness unreliability or hoaxing, Vallee proposed something radical and deeply unsettling. What if the absurdity is part of the signal? What if the phenomenon deliberately includes elements of the illogical, the theatrical, the contradictory, precisely because they defy rational explanation? What if it isn't trying to be understood in our conventional scientific terms? What if it operates more like a cosmic trickster, deliberately defying logic, staging events that shatter our comfortable worldview, that short-circuit our attempts at easy categorization and control? He pointed to the trickster archetype prevalent in mythology worldwide. Figures like Loki in Norse myth, Coyote in Native American traditions, Hermes Mercury in Greco-Roman lore, beings who operate outside conventional rules, who embody paradox and ambiguity, who use deception, humor, and disruption to provoke change, challenge authority, or reveal hidden truths about the nature of reality. This line of thinking led Vallee to speculate, most provocatively, about the phenomenon acting as a kind of control system for human consciousness and culture. Perhaps this intelligence, whatever its ultimate nature, isn't here to study us like biologists study ants, or conquer us like invaders, or enlighten us like benevolent space brothers. Perhaps its purpose is far more subtle, more complex, more integrated into the fabric of human history, to influence us, to subtly manipulate human belief systems over centuries, using staged myth-making events that resonate deeply with our collective unconscious, even as they baffle our rational minds. Events designed perhaps to inject novelty, confusion, and wonder into the human experience, preventing cultural stagnation. Events perhaps intended to guide our psychological and spiritual evolution along paths we don't consciously understand, using mystery, fear, and periodic intrusions of the impossible as catalysts. A subtle, pervasive force shaping our cultural development, our religions, our myths, our very perception of reality from the shadows. The implications are profoundly chilling. Are we merely actors, or perhaps even puppets, in a vast ancient drama directed by an unseen, protean intelligence whose motives remain utterly opaque? Are our most cherished beliefs, our foundational myths, our religious revelations, even our scientific paradigms, subtly influenced or perhaps even seeded by this enigmatic phenomenon? The rising action of Vallee's argument leads us to this precipice of profound uncertainty. Part 4. The Magonia Revelation. And so, we arrive at the precipice, the intellectual climax, the heart of the Magonia hypothesis, the culmination of Jacques Vallee's meticulous deconstruction of the prevailing UFO mythos and his reconstruction of a far stranger, more ancient reality. Vallee, the rigorous scientist, the astronomer, computer expert trained in logic and data analysis, looked squarely at the accumulated evidence, the undeniable historical continuity stretching back millennia, the uncanny phenomenological parallels bridging folklore and modern reports, the pervasive, almost deliberate absurdity woven into the fabric of the encounters, and concluded with devastating intellectual force that the reigning extraterrestrial hypothesis was simply too small, too neat, too limited, too culturally conditioned, too parochial to encompass the sheer, bewildering scope and strangeness of the facts. The extraterrestrial hypothesis, he argued forcefully in Passport to Magonia and subsequent works, was failing on multiple critical fronts. Historical blindness. It willfully ignored or casually dismissed the vast body of pre-1947 evidence, from ancient texts, medieval chronicles, folklore collections, religious accounts, suggesting that similar encounters with aerial phenomena and non-human entities were a persistent feature of human history, not a novelty of the atomic age. Excessive volume. The sheer number of reported close encounters, landings, and occupant sightings worldwide, thousands upon thousands even by the late 1960s, seemed far excessive and insufficient for any rational, clandestine scientific survey of Earth by advanced extraterrestrials. Why reveal themselves so often, yet so ambiguously? Behavioral absurdity. The reported behavior of the craft, impossible maneuvers, materialization, dematerialization, and the occupants, illogical actions, trivial interactions, contradictory messages, psychological manipulation, often contradicted the notion of advanced scientific explorers engaged in systematic research or reconnaissance. It seemed more like performance art, or psychological warfare, or simply play. Biological implausibility. The consistently humanoid form reported for many aliens, 2 arms, 2 legs, head, bilateral symmetry, is biologically unlikely to have evolved independently on countless different planets under vastly different environmental conditions. Furthermore, the specific forms often described, like the frail greys, seemed ill-suited for the rigors of interstellar travel or even survival in Earth's environment without technological support. Abduction contradictions. The reported procedures and narratives in abduction scenarios often seemed illogical, inconsistent, traumatic yet ultimately pointless, and difficult to reconcile with purported goals like genetic experimentation or interspecies communication by a vastly superior intelligence. Physical law defiance. The apparent ability of UFOs to manipulate space and time, instantaneous acceleration, deceleration, right-angle turns at impossible speeds, apparent travel through solid objects, materialization/dematerialization, suggested origins or mechanisms operating beyond the constraints of conventional physics and interstellar travel as we understand them. Faced with these profound inconsistencies, Vallee proposed something far more radical, far more unsettling, and infinitely stranger than simple visitors from other planets. The phenomenon, he argued, isn't necessarily coming from other planets within our familiar physical universe at all. It might be coming from elsewhere, another dimension, a parallel reality, perhaps coexisting with our own, normally invisible, inaccessible, yet capable of intersecting or bleeding through into our world under specific, perhaps even orchestrated circumstances. This is the conceptual core of the interdimensional hypothesis, IDH, an idea that, while having roots in earlier esoteric thought, passport to Magonia, was instrumental in bringing into the serious discourse surrounding UFOs, offering a powerful alternative to the limitations of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Think of it not as space travel across vast light years, but as reality-shifting, dimension-hopping. Entities emerging from an adjacent existence, operating under physical laws potentially different from, or more encompassing than, our own. Realms symbolized by the mythical Magonia, Elfland, or countless other names for the otherworld found in global folklore. Or perhaps, Vallee speculated, hinting at ideas later developed more fully by researchers like John Keel, author of UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse, and the Mothman Prophecies, The entities are ultra-terrestrial, intelligences native to Earth's own environment, but existing in a way we don't normally perceive. Hidden within our own biosphere, perhaps deep underground, underwater, consistent with numerous reports of unidentified submersible objects, or USOs entering and exiting oceans and lakes, or even existing on different energetic frequencies, different vibrational planes, or levels of reality intertwined with our own physical world. Keel's ultra-terrestrials were described as powerful, non-human entities, perhaps inorganic or energy-based, capable of manipulating energy and matter, staging elaborate hoaxes and encounters, like the Mothman sightings, to influence human belief, closely echoing Vallee's control system hypothesis. But the most crucial, the most mind-bending, and perhaps the most existentially terrifying aspect of Vallee's overarching hypothesis, crystallized in Passport to Magonia, is the concept of intelligent adaptation and cultural mimicry. The phenomenon, he argued, doesn't possess one fixed form, one stable identity that we can pin down and categorize. Instead, it presents itself, chameleon-like, protean, in forms and narratives best adapted to the believer's country, race, and social regime. It tailors its manifestations, its appearance, its technology, its messages, to resonate with the cultural expectations, the prevailing myths, the dominant belief systems, the deepest hopes and fears of the witnesses, and the society it encounters. In ages saturated with religious faith, when the primary framework for understanding the extraordinary was theological, it appears as angels bearing divine messages or demons offering temptation, complete with wings, halos, horns, fiery swords, or whatever iconography was culturally relevant. In rural societies steeped in folklore, where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural worlds were porous, and belief in nature, spirits, was strong. It manifests as fairies, elves, dwarves, goblins, jinn, nature spirits, beings emerging from hidden mounds, deep forests, lonely lakes, or desert wastes, offering enchantments, playing tricks, abducting humans, demanding offerings, embodying the capricious power of the wild. In our modern technological spacefaring era, an age shaped by science fiction, the Cold War, and the dawning possibility of space travel, it dons the guise of extraterrestrials arriving in structured craft, flying saucers, triangles, cigars, piloted by beings whose appearance often reflects our own futuristic or alien archetypes. The Greys with their large heads and advanced technology, the benevolent human-like Nordics, the menacing reptilians. It's a cosmic masquerade, a grand ongoing performance staged across the millennia. The phenomenon acts like a dynamic mirror, reflecting our own cultural assumptions, anxieties, and aspirations back at us. Why? Vallee suggested several unsettling possibilities, none mutually exclusive. Perhaps its purpose is to gain influence, subtly guiding our cultural and psychological development along predetermined paths. Perhaps it aims to teach us something fundamental about the nature of reality, consciousness, and our place in the cosmos, using paradox, absurdity, and ontological shock as pedagogical tools. Perhaps, most disturbingly, its primary motive is simply to deceive, to control, to keep us perpetually off balance, chasing shadows, arguing about interpretations, while its real purpose remains hidden, inscrutable. It functions, Vallee proposed, as a myth-making engine, constantly generating new legends, new beliefs, new religions, new anxieties, tailored for the times, ensuring its continued, perplexing interaction with humanity across the ages. This is the climax of Vallee's argument, the point where the familiar ground of scientific materialism and simple extraterrestrial explanations completely gives way to something far stranger, far more ambiguous. The UFO isn't necessarily a tangible object in the conventional sense, and the occupants aren't necessarily visitors arriving from a specific point in space and time. It's something fluid, something ancient, something deeply, inextricably intertwined with human consciousness, culture, and belief. It potentially originates from a reality that overlaps, underlies, or interpenetrates our own. It's a phenomenon that might not just violate our known laws of physics, but operate according to entirely different, perhaps psychical, informational, or hyperdimensional principles. The implications are staggering, forcing us to reconsider not just the UFO mystery, but the very nature of reality, the structure of history, the power of belief, the reliability of our senses, and the hidden depths and potentials of the human mind itself. We are not just passive observers of an external phenomenon. We may be active participants, our own consciousness, our own cultural frameworks, shaping the very form and meaning of the encounter. The Magonia revelation leaves us adrift in a sea of profound uncertainty, questioning the very foundations of our world. Part 5. Ripples in Reality. How was such a radical, unsettling idea that UFOs were essentially fairies in spacesuits, manifestations of a trickster intelligence from another dimension, or something even stranger, received when Passport to Magonia exploded onto the scene in 1969? As you might expect, the reaction was complex, fragmented, polarized, mirroring the very multifaceted, ambiguous phenomenon Vallee described. It wasn't a simple case of universal acceptance or outright rejection. Instead, it sent ripples of influence, controversy, and inspiration through diverse fields, fundamentally altering the landscape of anomalous studies. Within the guarded halls of mainstream academia, Passport to Magonia caused definite ripples, sparking interest in certain corners. But it certainly didn't trigger the tidal waves of paradigm shift that might have followed a groundbreaking discovery in a more conventional, accepted field like physics or biology. Its highly speculative nature, its reliance on anecdotal evidence often drawn from folklore or historical accounts impossible to verify with absolute scientific certainty, and the sheer, unshakable weirdness of its subject matter kept it at arm's length from many established disciplines, particularly the hard sciences. The book dealt explicitly with what Vallee himself termed non-facts, exploring the structure and persistence of a recurrent myth. This made it fascinating but difficult territory for disciplines heavily reliant on empirical proof, controlled experimentation, and falsifiable hypotheses. Some academic critics focused on potential methodological flaws. They questioned whether Vallee engaged in cherry-picking, selectively highlighting cases and details that most strongly supported his thesis while potentially downplaying contradictory evidence or alternative explanations. Others raised concerns about the validity of drawing direct parallels across vast cultural and temporal divides, suggesting the risk of argument from spurious similarity, finding connections based on superficial resemblances rather than deep, demonstrable structural identity. The book's inclusion of cases that might have been hoaxes, misidentifications, or psychological phenomena, without always rigorously addressing or filtering these possibilities, a significant challenge in the pre-internet era of information access, also drew fire from skeptics who demanded stricter evidentiary standards before entertaining such extraordinary claims. Vallee himself, it should be reiterated, often acknowledged the inherent ambiguity of the data, framing the book less as a definitive scientific proof of an external reality and more as an exploration of patterns in human experience and belief, leaving the ultimate ontological interpretation deliberately open. Yet, despite this skepticism from the scientific mainstream, in specific academic niches, the book found fertile ground and resonated powerfully, recognized for its originality and interdisciplinary boldness. Folklorists, while perhaps debating his specific interpretations or the nuances of his comparative methodology, widely acknowledged the book's landmark significance in explicitly and systematically linking modern UFO narratives to traditional folk beliefs, particularly the rich and complex lore surrounding fairies, elves, and other supernatural beings in European traditions. Passport to Magonia became a key text in the burgeoning academic study of UFO reports as a form of contemporary legendary or modern folklore, influencing scholars who examined how these narratives emerge, circulate, adapt, and reflect underlying cultural anxieties and beliefs. Vallee's work demonstrated compellingly that UFOs were not just a potential scientific puzzle, but also a profound cultural and folkloric phenomenon demanding serious analysis within that framework. Sociologists saw immense value in Vallee's exploration of myth generation and belief formation in a supposedly rational, secular, technological age. His thesis aligned perfectly with sociological inquiries into collective behavior, rumor transmission, the social construction of reality, moral panics, and the potential links between waves of anomalous reports, flaps, and periods of significant social stress, cultural transition, or rapid technological change. The core idea that the phenomenon adapts its manifestations to the social regime was inherently sociological, highlighting the interplay between external stimuli, if any, and social interpretation. Vallee's work provided a rich, complex case study for how societies grapple with the unknown, negotiate consensus reality, and generate meaning around anomalous experiences. The later trend towards the commodification and sensationalization of UFO and abduction narratives in popular media, however, was noted by some scholars as a factor that unfortunately hindered serious academic study by fostering dismissive attitudes among mainstream academics, a development Vallee himself likely viewed with dismay. Historians appreciated Vallee's ambitious and well-researched effort to place the modern UFO phenomenon within a much longer historical trajectory, challenging the pervasive notion of its novelty. His work prompted deeper historical analysis of how interpretations of seemingly similar anomalous events, unexplained lights in the sky, encounters with strange aerial beings, reports of abduction or otherworldly journeys, have shifted dramatically over time, depending on the prevailing worldview and cultural context. He showed how phenomena that might once have been interpreted through religious frameworks, angels, demons, divine signs, later shifted to folkloric interpretations, fairies, goblins, spirits of place, and eventually, in the 20th century, to technological ones, extraterrestrial spacecraft. Perhaps the warmest and most enduring academic reception came from the field of religious studies, particularly from scholars comfortable navigating the often blurry, intellectually fertile borderlands between religion, esotericism, mysticism, folklore, and the paranormal. Vallee's direct, detailed comparisons between modern UFO encounters and traditional religious phenomena, encounters with angels, demons, Marian apparitions like Fatima, Lourdes, or Guadalupe, visionary experiences, shamanic journeys, interactions with deities or nature spirits, provided incredibly rich material for comparative analysis. His work could be readily situated within broader studies of myth-making, altered states of consciousness, mysticism, shamanism, the phenomenology of religious experience, and the history of Western esotericism. Influential scholars like Geoffrey J. Kripal, a prominent historian of religion specializing in comparative mysticism and the relationship between the paranormal, the sacred, and popular culture, explicitly engaged with Vallee's work, positioning him as a key figure. One of the authors of the impossible. Kripal saw Vallee's research as crucial for understanding how perennial human encounters with the numinous, the impossible, or the sacred manifest in contemporary, often secularized popular culture, frequently disguised in the seemingly rational language of science fiction and technology. For Kripal and others in this field, UFO narratives become modern mythologies, contemporary transformations of enduring human encounters with the extraordinary, the transcendent, the terrifyingly other. Conversely, some theological interpretations, particularly within conservative Christian circles influenced by Vallee and later authors like John Keel, who emphasized the deceptive and often malevolent aspects of the phenomenon, adapted the Magonia framework to argue forcefully for a straightforward, demonological interpretation of UFOs, seeing them as deceptive manifestations of fallen angels engaged in spiritual warfare, echoing medieval demonology, but updated for the space age. Outside the sometimes rigid confines and skeptical filters of the ivory tower, in the sprawling, passionate, often marginalized world of paranormal investigation, Fortean studies, and various spiritual and esoteric communities, Passport to Magonia achieved near-legendary status. It became and remains essential reading, a foundational text cited with reverence and recognized for its profound impact. Its appeal within these communities was multifaceted. Vallee's impeccable scientific credentials lent an air of authority and intellectual rigor, often lacking in the field, validating the serious study of these phenomena. His meticulous cataloging of nearly 1,000 historical and modern cases provided an invaluable resource for researchers, investigators, and enthusiasts alike. Most importantly, his central hypothesis offered a powerful, potentially unifying framework for the bewildering diversity of phenomena often investigated by these groups. Suddenly, UFOs didn't have to be seen as entirely separate from ghosts, poltergeists, cryptid sightings like Mothman, Bigfoot, or lake monsters. Encounters with spirits, elementals, or other folkloric entities. They could all potentially be different faces, different manifestations of the same underlying phenomenon, expressions of an intelligence or reality bleeding through from Magonia, Sahari Elfland, the astral plane, or some other dimension, adapting its form to the specific situation and the observer's expectations. The book found a prominent place on the Forteans' bookshelf, appealing to those fascinated by Charles Fort's pioneering work on damned data, anomalies ignored or explained away by mainstream science, and dedicated to seeking connections across conventional categories, challenging scientific orthodoxy. While major official ufology groups of the era, like MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, might have primarily focused their efforts on investigating the extraterrestrial hypothesis through physical evidence and witness testimony, Vallee's influence undeniably began shifting perspectives within the broader field, encouraging a more critical look at the limitations of the extraterrestrial hypothesis and a wider consideration of alternative, stranger possibilities. The book resonated deeply with parapsychological interests, even if direct formal reviews published in leading peer-reviewed parapsychology journals like the Journal of Parapsychology or the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research, specifically addressing Passport to Magonia, were scarce in the available records from that time. The phenomena Vallee meticulously documented as frequently associated with UFO encounters, such as altered states of consciousness, trance, dreamlike states, apparent telepathic communication between witnesses and entities, vivid visions or hallucinations, profound physiological effects, paralysis, healing, burns, precognitive elements or prophecies, poltergeist-like activities surrounding witnesses after encounters, and significant long-term personality transformations, often towards increased spirituality or ecological awareness, overlapped significantly with phenomena studied by parapsychologists under the umbrella of PSI, psychic phenomena, like ESP, extrasensory perception, and PK, psychokinesis. The Magonia hypothesis, By moving beyond a purely physical nuts and bolts framework and suggesting interaction with consciousness or other dimensions, provided a far more accommodating theoretical space for incorporating potential psi elements than the strictly materialist extraterrestrial hypothesis. Vallee's own later collaborations with physicists Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ at SRI International, who were deeply involved in classified government-funded research into psi phenomena like remote viewing, the Stargate project, further cemented this connection and indicated his serious, ongoing engagement with these concepts at the intersection of physics, consciousness, and the paranormal. For individuals and groups operating within spiritual and esoteric frameworks, the book was often seen as nothing short of revelatory. It provided powerful validation for worldviews already populated with various forms of non-human intelligence, distinct from purely biological extraterrestrials, beings like elementals, spirits of nature, nature spirits, jinn, genies of Middle Eastern lore, demons, angelic hierarchies, or the inhabitants of subtle planes described in traditions like theosophy or anthroposophy. Vallee explicitly mentioned or alluded to many of these categories as historical parallels to modern UFO occupants. The central concept of Magonia as a parallel world or another dimension mapped easily and intuitively onto existing esoteric cosmologies involving multiple planes of existence, astral realms, etheric bodies, or spiritual hierarchies. Vallee's own thoughtful reflections on the potential religious implications of the phenomenon, its demonstrated capacity to shake cultural foundations and challenge established religious institutions, its striking parallels with historical religious apparitions and mystical experiences, and its potential role in fostering spiritual transformation or awakening, further invited such interpretations. Passport to Magonia acted as a crucial bridging text. It allowed individuals holding paranormal or spiritual worldviews, which often include concepts of non-material entities, psychic phenomena, hidden dimensions, and the power of consciousness, to make sense of the modern mystery of UFOs without needing to adopt the purely materialist and often reductionist assumptions of the classical extraterrestrial hypothesis. By explicitly linking UFOs to older traditions of supernatural encounters and introducing concepts like parallel realities, psychic effects, and symbolic manipulation compatible with esoteric thought, Vallee enabled the integration of flying saucers into a broader, more ancient spectrum of paranormal and spiritual interaction, rather than treating them as an isolated, purely technological anomaly. It suggested the phenomenon was not just about hardware and propulsion systems, but about consciousness, meaning, transformation, and perhaps even the fate of the human soul. The ripples from Passport to Magonia spread far and wide, disturbing the waters of conventional thought and opening up deeper, stranger currents of inquiry. Part 6. The Legacy of Doubt. So, where does this leave us, standing here decades after Jacques Vallee first opened that unsettling passport to a reality far stranger than most dared to conceive? How do we evaluate this strange, compelling, enduring, and deeply controversial work today, looking back with the benefit of hindsight and further research? Its strengths remain undeniable, explaining its lasting influence and its status as a genuine classic in the literature of the anomalous. It was, first and foremost, a work of stunning originality and profound intellectual courage. Vallee bravely challenged the prevailing dogma of the extraterrestrial hypothesis at a time when it was rapidly solidifying into the default, almost unquestioned explanation within both popular culture and much of the ufological community. His interdisciplinary sweep was groundbreaking for its time, drawing connections across history, folklore, religious studies, mythology, psychology, and modern ufology, he demonstrated compellingly that understanding this complex phenomenon required looking far beyond the narrow confines of any single discipline, particularly conventional physics or astronomy. The sheer depth of his historical research and the meticulous volume of comparative data presented, especially in the extensive appendix cataloging nearly 1,000 landings and close encounters from 1868 to 1968, are testaments to his diligence and provide an invaluable resource for researchers even today. And his remarkable ability to perceive subtle patterns, to recognize the uncanny, persistent echoes between a medieval fairy encounter and a modern abduction report, to see the alien in the fairy tale and the fairy tale in the alien report, was a significant intellectual achievement. The work successfully, and perhaps permanently, complicated the UFO phenomenon, rescuing it from simplistic, often culturally biased interpretations and revealing its profound historical, cultural, and psychological dimensions. It forced a confrontation with the high strangeness that many other researchers preferred to ignore or explain away. But the weaknesses and inherent limitations of the work are also clear, and acknowledging them is crucial for maintaining a critical perspective. While the Magonia hypothesis elegantly explains some perplexing aspects of UFO phenomena, it remains speculative and unproven. Vallee himself acknowledges the ambiguity of the data and the tentative nature of his conclusions. The methodology, relying on analogy, pattern recognition, and anecdotal reports, is vulnerable to criticism regarding reliability and potential for confirmation bias. Furthermore, as a product of its time, researched in the 1960s, published in 1969, the book's scope was necessarily limited by the accessibility of global data and diverse non-Western cultural perspectives available then. While Vallee commendably included some intriguing examples from Japan, ancient Mesoamerica, and other non-European contexts, the primary focus inevitably leaned towards European and North American folklore and UFO cases, reflecting the biases inherent in the available scholarship and reporting systems of that era. A truly comprehensive global application and testing of the Magonia hypothesis remains a significant challenge for contemporary researchers. And, of course, subsequent research and theoretical developments in fields unknown or nascent in 1969, such as advanced consciousness studies, interpretations of quantum physics exploring entanglement and non-locality, digital information theory, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science exploring perception and belief formation, offer potentially powerful new lenses through which Vallee's pioneering ideas could be re-evaluated, refined, expanded, or perhaps even challenged in ways he couldn't have foreseen. Its legacy, however, despite these limitations and ongoing debates, is profound and undeniable. Passport to Magonia fundamentally altered the landscape of ufology and the broader study of anomalous phenomena. Its influence is clearly visible across multiple domains. Within ufology, it played an absolutely crucial role in diversifying hypotheses beyond the often stifling dominance of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It directly fueled the development and popularization of alternative frameworks like the interdimensional hypothesis, IDH, and ultra-terrestrial theories, providing them with historical depth and intellectual credibility. It forced even staunch extraterrestrial hypothesis proponents to grapple more seriously with the historical precedents and the high strangeness aspects of the phenomenon they often preferred to sideline. Twertitint in psychosocial studies. While Vallee himself leaned towards an external reality for the phenomenon, his emphasis on cultural context, belief systems, psychological effects, and the potential for deception heavily influenced psychosocial approaches to UFOs. It highlighted the critical importance of these factors in shaping encounter narratives even inspiring the name of the prominent skeptical but intellectually serious journal Magonia, which explored UFOs primarily as cultural and psychological phenomena. In Fortean Studies, the book is considered a cornerstone text, a jewel in the crown of Fortean literature. It perfectly embodies the spirit of Charles Fort himself, investigating marginalized data, damned data, seeking connections across seemingly disparate phenomena, challenging scientific orthodoxy, and embracing the inherent weirdness of the universe. In academia, it continues to inspire and provoke researchers, particularly in fields like religious studies, anthropology, folklore, and the history of esotericism, who explore the complex, often uncomfortable borderlands between science, religion, folklore, technology, and consciousness. Influential scholars like Geoffrey Kripal explicitly build upon Vallee's insights into modern myth-making, the persistence of archetypes, and encounters with the impossible. In culture, its ideas, often filtered through Vallee's association with Close Encounters of the Third Kind and his subsequent widely read books, Dimensions, Confrontations, Revelations, Messengers of Deception, have subtly permeated popular culture. They have contributed to a more nuanced, complex, and arguably more accurate understanding of the UFO mystery, moving beyond the simplistic aliens from space narrative towards something deeper, stranger, and more existentially challenging. Ultimately, the book's most profound and enduring legacy may lie in its successful reframing of the fundamental question surrounding UFOs and related anomalies. Vallee, with intellectual rigor and imaginative flair, forced us to move beyond simply asking, "Are they extraterrestrial spacecraft?" He compelled us, and continues to compel us, to ask deeper, more unsettling, and perhaps ultimately more fruitful questions. What is the deep history of these encounters, and what patterns persist across millennia? How do cultural beliefs, psychological states, and even the act of observation itself shape the perception and interpretation of these events? What is the role of consciousness, both human and potentially non-human, in the manifestation and experience of these phenomena? Could the phenomenon itself be inherently deceptive, symbolic, performative, or even manipulative in its interactions with us? Are we dealing with a purely physical phenomenon, a purely psychic one, or something fundamentally different that transcends and perhaps unites both categories? C'est un passport to Magonias. Enduring relevance, its continued power to fascinate and disturb, arises from its courageous confrontation with the apparent limitations of conventional scientific materialism and, indeed, conventional religious frameworks, in explaining phenomena that seem to operate precisely at the intersection of the physical world, cultural narratives, subjective experience, and the very depths of human consciousness. Its exploration of reality-bending events, observer effects, the power of belief, potential manipulations of perception, and the deep resonance with universal archetypes prefigured later discussions in fields grappling with the fundamental nature of reality itself, from speculative interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the many worlds interpretation, entanglement, or theories involving extra dimensions, to advanced consciousness studies and the hard problem of qualia in the philosophy of mind. By highlighting phenomena that resist easy physical explanation and appear deeply, inextricably intertwined with subjective experience and cultural meaning-making, the book continues to challenge researchers, investigators, experiencers, and indeed all of us to consider more holistic, more nuanced, and potentially paradigm-shifting models of reality and our place within its vast, mysterious, and perhaps surprisingly interactive tapestry. It left us with a legacy not of certainty, but of profound, necessary doubt about the maps we use to navigate existence. Part 7. Beyond the Veil. We began tonight by questioning the familiar narrative, the comfortable, almost domesticated story of flying saucers arriving like cosmic tourists from the depths of outer space. Jacques Vallee, through the intellectual depth charge that is passport to Magonia, offered us a different kind of passport, one leading not necessarily outward to the distant stars, but inward into the shadowed archives of our own history, sideways into the labyrinthine pathways of our own minds and myths, and perhaps downward or upward into the unsettling proximity of adjacent realities, hidden dimensions folded against our own. He painted a picture, assembled from countless fragments of human testimony across millennia, of a phenomenon not new but ancient, not fixed in form but fluidly adaptable, a master of disguise, not simply physical but profoundly psychic, symbolic, and interactive, a phenomenon that seems to mirror our deepest beliefs and anxieties, exploit our cultural expectations, and leave behind tantalizing clues, often wrapped in layers of baffling absurdity that defy easy explanation or dismissal. Angels, demons, fairies, elves, goblins, jinn, sky gods, gray aliens, luminous orbs, trickster figures offering cryptic advice or nonsensical gifts. Are they all masks worn by the same elusive protean intelligence? An intelligence that might originate from another dimension, slipping through the cracks in space-time like smoke through a keyhole? Or from hidden depths within our own world, an ultra-terrestrial presence, perhaps subterranean, submarine, or atmospheric, that we've failed to recognize, mistaking the familiar for the alien? Or could it even be, in some way we barely possess the concepts to comprehend, a projection or interaction originating from the untapped collective potentials of human consciousness itself, a kind of planetary dream bleeding into waking reality, shaping and being shaped by our beliefs? Vallee, in Passport to Magonia, didn't give us the false comfort of a final, neat answer. He wasn't selling certainty or a new dogma to replace the old extraterrestrial hypothesis. Instead, he bequeathed us something perhaps more valuable, if more unsettling, a profound sense of unease, a state of radical uncertainty, a deep suspicion that the universe, or multiverse, is far stranger, far more interactive, far less stable, and far more mysterious than conventional science, or even conventional religion, typically admits. He left us wondering, perhaps permanently, about the true nature of the visitors, their unfathomable motives, if any, and our own unwitting, perhaps essential role in their long, enigmatic game with humanity. Could systematic, rigorous, cross-cultural analysis truly reveal statistically significant differences in the symbolic forms of encounters reported today? Technological versus magical motifs varying by cultural background, while preserving underlying structural similarities in the narrative patterns, abduction sequences, missing time reports, specific physiological effects, thus providing evidence for Vallee's adaptation hypothesis? Do individuals reporting encounters with predominantly folkloric characteristics, explicitly identifying entities as fairies or spirits, describing overtly magical interactions, genuinely exhibit different, measurable psychological profiles, perhaps scoring higher on validated measures of fantasy proneness, dissociation, absorption, or specific personality traits like openness, compared to individuals reporting purely technological encounters consistent with the standard extraterrestrial hypothesis, suggesting our own cognitive styles influence the interpretation or even the manifestation of potentially similar underlying anomalous stimuli? Can we meticulously trace the historical evolution of specific, bizarre, recurring motifs identified by Vallee as bridging folklore and UFO reports, like the offering or avoidance of specific foods, salt, distinct physiological effects, temporary paralysis combined with skin markings, or communication characterized by nonsensical, paradoxical statements across centuries of narratives, demonstrating not just persistence, but subtle transformations and adaptations, like a mimetic virus mutating its surface proteins over time while retaining its core code. These are the kinds of unsettling, paradigm-challenging questions Vallee's work compels us to ask. The strange, potentially revelatory territories his passport points towards. These are not just intellectual puzzles. They probe the very nature of our reality and our perception of it. So, the next time you hear a story that doesn't quite fit the standard narrative, a whisper of impossible lights maneuvering in the night sky, a tale of strange beings encountered in the lonely, liminal places of the world, or even experience a dream that feels disturbingly, tangibly real, remember Magonia. Remember the possibility, explored with such depth and courage by Jacques Vallee, that the phenomenon isn't new, just wearing its latest disguise, tailored perhaps just for you, reflecting your own deepest assumptions back at you. Remember the chilling thought that the other might not be out there across unimaginable gulfs of interstellar space, but right here, woven into the very fabric of reality, lurking just beyond the fragile threshold of ordinary perception, pulling strings we can't even see, influencing our world in ways we are only beginning to glimpse. The truth, as Jacques Vallee dared to suggest over half a century ago, might be far more complex, far more mysterious, far more intimately connected to who we are, to our history, our consciousness, our future, and far, far closer than we ever dared to imagine. Keep watching the skies, yes, but perhaps, as Vallee implicitly urged us, look deeper within and further back into the shadowed, myth-haunted landscapes of our shared human past as well. The journey into the mystery has only just begun. The passport has been issued. The destination remains unknown. As we step back from the crossroads, remember, the veil between the known and unknown is thinner than we think. But the story doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. Because what we explore here is not just about the phenomena, but the journey that we are all on, searching for meaning and our purpose in life, seeking the knowledge and wisdom to solve the deeper mysteries in our universe and to find and fulfill our destiny. Unexplained sightings, spirits, and science, they are all connected, and they have been interwoven into the grand tapestry of life. So remember, keep pulling at the threads, because this has been Crossroads of the Veil.